Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to my autobiography, The Perils of an Interesting Life. This is Chapter 5, The Church from Hell, and this time I promise. I will say that trying to tell the story about this church implosion has been difficult. I tried to tell it in episode 4, and I got distracted by telling some other stories, and I didn't get around to what happened in that church. Now in episode 5, this is about my 10th or 11th attempt over the course of the past week to try and tell this story. And I keep getting distracted into other things, and I keep making mistakes and losing my way. And I can't help but think that the devil doesn't want me to tell this story. So I'm working even harder to tell it, and I'm going to stay focused now. I think I felt like that I needed to tell the story, but I don't know that I need to go into too much detail, because the events that occurred in this church affected so many lives. Some of the things that happened, marriages were torn apart and then reconciled, and a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about was swept under the rug, covered in forgiveness within a marriage, and I don't want to jeopardize that by naming names or getting into too much detail. But I've never seen a church so completely attacked. While I was being attacked at school, while I was being attacked by the community, the devil was attacking my dad's church from the inside out. Now, we had just started this church. It wasn't very old. I think we were in that church for right at 2 years. Just under 2 years. I would say a year and 9 months, if I was being more precise. Very quickly, within the first year, I went from being a kid who was kind of multi-instrumental and kind of helpful and somewhat impressive. I went from that to being a total child prodigy who was I played about as good when I was 11 years old as I do now, if you can imagine that kind of mind-blowing concept to get, adult quality professional musician sound out of a child. Give you a case in point. While we were living there pastoring this church, my dad had a side project where we ran a secondhand store. And there was a beautiful, ornate, upright piano that we had picked up at some sale somewhere on the cheap, and we had repainted and refinished it, cleaned it all up, put it up in the front window, and we're selling it for like $150, something like that back then, which was a lot of money, but we put some time and energy into restoring it. And because it was in the front window, it was so pretty in the front picture window of our secondhand store that I used to sit in that front window bored, because this was no internet, no television stations. There was, in the town of Imbler, we shared half of the post office in Imbler, Oregon. I thought about getting back there someday, that tiny little town. It was the post office, our secondhand store, a grocery store across the street that didn't even have a gas pump, and a auto mechanic shop, I guess, for people that were passing through who broke down, and a little diner. And anyway, it was right on the main highway going, I think, towards Elgin, Oregon, is where Imbler is. And I was sitting in the front window playing the piano like normal, because I would sit in there for hours and play this piano. And a rich man in a Cadillac convertible, like a 1978, one of them big, or 76, one of them big boats of a vehicle, a fat cat. He stops in front and he puzzles and he looks at me and he can hear the music, and he gets out of the car and he stands and he watches me through the window for a minute as I'm just tearing it up. Like I think I'm playing some Scott Joplin or something like that. I'm playing ragtime, which is what I was really into. So I'm playing some ragtime, Sugarfoot Rag or something. And anyway, he stands and stares at me, and then he comes in and I see him walk by and he looks at me, and he's sideways because the door had to go right past the entrance up to the front window. And this guy goes in and he's talking to my dad, and he's like, "How much for the player piano?" And Dad says, "Well, that's not a player piano. That's just a standard upright piano." And the guy goes, "What? How much for the player piano? I'm talking about the player piano in the front window." And my dad says, "That's not a player piano. That's just a regular piano." And he said, "You mean to tell me that kid is making that music come out of that piano?" And my dad goes, "Well, yeah." And I'm still playing. And the guy walks over and he looks at me even closer, and he's eyeballing me. He goes, "Look, man, if you don't want to sell me the player piano, just say so, but don't lie to my face and tell me that boy is playing that piano." And he's like, "I don't know what to tell you. I'm not lying to you." And I stopped playing. I'm like, "See, I'm playing it." He goes, "You guys are just messing with me, and I don't appreciate it." And he gets in his car, and he storms out, gets in his car, and leaves. He could not fathom that music was coming from a kid making that kind of music. So while all this is going on, and I'm growing as a musician, while I'm battling this devil is trying to take this church apart. But I was completely unaware of it because I'm growing so fast as a musician. It's phenomenal that I felt like I had a MIDI cable stuck in the top of my head before there was such a thing as a MIDI cable. I envisioned some kind of plugging into my head and just giving me all this information pouring into my mind. Music theory, chord progressions, all these things that I didn't even know that I knew. I didn't know. I was being given. It was being given to me. It was a download. And there were several people that just came to our church because they were drawn to the music. One of them was an Apache couple who were right off the reservation. They brought with them a really powerful rhythm, a Native American rhythm, that influenced me so much you can still hear it in the syncopations and the patterns that I play as a piano player. And we developed a band together, the old Marine and me and the Apache couple, and members of our church and people that would come in, and we built this happening choir in about 2 or 3 months. We went from having nobody and no church to having this rockin' choir that was getting recognition all over the valley? The Grand Ronde Valley in La Grande. And so we went in the spring to a big tri-state multi-denominational Synkspiration showcase of gospel artists from all over the West Coast, specifically the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Utah, Nevada. People from all over, as far away as Wyoming, were coming to, I think it was either Boise or Pocatello. It was really snowy, so I think it might have been Pocatello, Idaho. And we went there in the spring. It was still there was still a foot of snow on the ground. And we had this big event, you know, and our choir, we practiced it up. I had all these original arrangements that just seemed to come out of my mind, out of my head. And I worked this group like somebody who'd done it before. And I took control of the band until I created the sound, which was, I'm telling you, you had to get up and move. When you heard that Apache rhythm and you heard it played into that kind of, you know, that doom, 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 that Pentecostal doom, 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 doom rhythm. And then you get this Apache backbeat on top of it. I'll have to play some of it for you in a future video sometime just to show you the rhythm. I need an instrument to show you, but something. But anyway, yeah, we were rocking it. We went to this group with people that were really, really practiced groups. You know, traveling groups were there. And when it came time to do our 3 songs, our little set, there was one piano player who seemed to play for everyone because he was just so good. Other piano players went, well, you can play for our group. And he had a very distinct style, but I knew there was no way he could play our arrangements. He didn't know them. This rhythm was alien to him, I'm sure. And but at the same time, I was an 11-year-old kid. So what am I going to do? Go up and go, hey, yeah, I'm the kid that's going to replace you. And there was a little bit of pressure and some egos going around. So my dad decides to give the guy a chance, and he benches me. And they start this first song. And the guy thinks he knows the song because it's a common song, but he don't know the way we do it. And it gets all jacked up, and he just can't follow. And honestly, the guy that was just moments before was a superstar piano player sounds like a first-year piano student, and he can't find the groove, and he is lost, and then he's fighting with the group. And finally, the old Marine goes, "Fix it. Go over there, fix it." So I go up to the guy, and I go, "Man, can you just, I got this. I got this." To his dismay, you know, he had no choice but to bail from the piano stool. So he slides over, I slide in behind him, left hand goes down, hits the rhythm, boom, the whole song locks up. Whoom! It takes off like a shot. We are in it. And it's just a night and day transformation. When we hit it like that, I heard scattered applause break out from around the room at this kid who just walked in and transformed this groove and you know, realigned this song and got it moving. We did our 3 songs. We had them on their feet. We had the whole crowd going, and we were the talk of this multi-state event. But it was right about then, when we got a little taste of success, that I think pride stepped in. Not through me. I was a kid. I didn't have any pride. I couldn't believe I was able to make music like this. I was flabbergasted by it. None of the kids that I was fighting at school had any idea about my musicianship. They would find out before the end of that school year, that first school year. So, the thing is about traveling musicians and taking trips and spending all of this time practicing and every Sunday and then twice a week is that you start spending a lot of time with other people other than your family and your spouse. And so there were several men and women in the church band, the drummer, a couple of the singers, the Apache couple, who got a little too close to some of the other people in that group, and unbeknownst to us, the leadership, secret affairs begin to sprout up amongst the players. And I've never seen this kind of promiscuous adultery just break out in a church and explode overnight and destroy a church. But, you know, the Apache man had an affair with my second cousin. You know, there was a Italian couple who sang in the band, and he had an affair with another young lady in the group. And the biggest one was my own aunt, the one that you know, peeled out and took off. You know, my cousin's mother, my mom's sister. We'll just call her Punky, because that was her nickname. But my Aunt Punky, her husband, my cousin's father, was a long-haul truck driver and gone a lot. He was gone a lot. And when my cousin ran away, which happened, you know, happened a little later, that everything broke up in the summer. The affair started over the winter, but the things didn't break up until things didn't blow up until summer, fall of the next year. And so she had, my cousin, my Aunt Punky had some extra time on her hands with a trucker gone, and her oldest son moved out, and, you know, her middle son had a girlfriend, was never home, and so she was home a lot or at church. And she struck up a friendship, a relationship, turned out to be an affair, with the drummer in our band. Now, his situation was weird. He had a wife that weighed 400 or 500 pounds, and he had 7 children, and they lived in a antique Victorian home with no modern conveniences. I think they might have had one bathroom and running water, but they didn't have television, they didn't have carpeting, they didn't have modern conveniences like we would, even for that time. They were just completely they were in the 19th century, you know, in so many ways. And she would come to church at first until she just got too big to make the trip. She just couldn't get in and out of the car anymore. And she stopped coming to church, but he kept coming and bringing the kids and playing in the band until him and my aunt started having an affair. And it's probably one of the most disgraceful things I've ever seen out of a man. And I would name this guy and just point him out, except for my aunt. I'm trying to protect her. Obviously, she's no longer with him, but she did leave her husband. He left his wife. They got married. They moved away, found my cousin who was living on the street, and moved him back into the house for a short time until he got busted and went away to prison. And they were married on again, off again, had a tumultuous relationship, and they were married for a while. They got married. 3 out of 4 of those marriages ended in divorce that were involved in that, and it was the biggest wife-swapping mess I've ever seen in my life. I don't know how to tell you how it just imploded. And then in the middle of all of this, really, I think it would have been right before it broke, my dad had a pretty serious heart attack. And he said that he had a vision right before his, you know, in conjunction with his heart attack. That he woke up in the middle of the night and sat up in bed, and he saw a man that he recognized as his guardian angel, but he was dressed in traveling clothes and had a suitcase. He was wearing an overcoat and a fedora, and he had a suitcase, and he looked through the bedroom window at my dad, who was sat up in bed to see him, and he waved goodbye to him, and he left. And then coming in the room right behind him was the angel of death with the hood and the scythe and everything, and he pulled that scythe back and he hit my dad in the chest, and my dad had a heart attack. His story, not mine. There were a lot of supernatural occurrences in that town. I picked up a host of demonic spirits that followed me around, tormenting me until I got spiritually strong enough to shake them in that town. And that's for another tale to tell. But I have a detailed story of demonic oppression that nearly destroyed my mental health as a child, as a young adult, as a preteen. And until I learned to pray it off of me, and then I went on to have a normal life and never had those attacks ever occur again. But it took a concerted effort, and it took sharing it with someone else and getting a prayer partner involved to pray, protection prayers over me. I was being attacked in the night in my sleep. But that happened after we left there. And then if all of this wasn't enough of a story for you, then while we were there, my mom developed a tumor they thought was ovarian cancer, and she was rushed in, really, and had an emergency hysterectomy and had all of the stuff removed. The tumor was benign. It was not a cancerous tumor, but it was still a cancer scare. That, combined with the implosion, combined with the loss of income due to the church attendance dropping off, the loss of our band. It was just back to me and the old Marine and one of the lifelong friends of the family who also played organ and or bass guitar. It was just down to the three of us, and with Mom getting sick and needing surgery, we just shut the church down, and it's the first time I ever saw the Marine just fail. It's the first time I ever seen him just fail at something and tie it up in a bow and kick it to the curb and go, okay, well, that was what that was. That was a failure. And he would struggle in the ministry after that failure. That failure would haunt him. He would never start another church after that attempt. He made one more attempt, which just never took off, and then when you hear the rest of this story, you'll know why. But we moved back to the valley. We moved in with my grandmother, my dad's mom, my Indian grandma. And we tried to regroup. Dad tried to start a church in Salem, but there's so many churches in Salem that even though it was out in the country, it didn't help. And we felt like we were drawing away from other churches instead of creating something new. And we were involved in that when my mom went in for her final checkup post-surgery. And the nurse who was assisting the doctor in that examination had just transferred to his practice from a dermatology practice specializing in skin cancer. Now, all through the tail end of our time in La Grande, my mom had a mole on her toe right between these two toes in the middle. Right there was a little mole on her foot. And this mole would swell up and get sore, and she'd scratch the top off, and it would scab up but not quite heal, and then it would ooze, and it got infected, and she'd have to treat it. And that was going on all through this time in La Grande. And then at the time that she, between the surgery and the time she went in for the follow-up checkup, her big toenail got an infection underneath it and started to ooze and stink. I remember her doctoring it and having to pay attention and take care of it. And so this had been going on, and she went in for her final checkup, and this nurse saw that toe, saw the mole, asked her a couple of questions about it, and then she went to the doctor, who was an internalist. He was not a dermatologist or skin cancer expert. And she said, look, I know enough about this to know that it looks to me like that's a melanoma cancer, and you should probably get her checked out like right now, because if it's in this stage, that means she already has rampant cancer. And so they checked it out. They took her across to another part of the Oregon Medical Center in Portland, was where she was getting this appointment, and they removed that without her coming home. She went straight from her follow-up appointment straight into surgery. They removed it, they biopsied it, and she came home from that morning appointment late in the evening. And let me tell you, the old Marine was mad. He thought she'd been off traipsing around Portland, having herself a fun time, and he was fit to be tied. I thought it was Divorce City. He was so angry by the time she got back that night. But she came back with information from the doctor, a Band-Aid on her foot, and the diagnosis of advanced melanoma cancer on the verge of lymphoma. If she did not have surgery, they gave her less than 60 days to live. They were trying to scare her. She might have lived longer. I don't know. And as you hear this story, you may not know whether you may be like me, torn as to whether these doctors saved her or God saved her. If you know my channel, you know my mom is still alive. She is 84 years old, 85, about to be 85 years old. And so they rushed her, they had rushed her in and did the biopsy. They got a confirmation of cancer, and they set her her date for surgery for 3 days. They got her in as quick as possible. They got her in 3 days. 3 days they went in and they removed these 2 toes, and they cut clear back into her foot like this. So all she has left is, you know, the big toe, the one right next to it, and the pinky toe. And the other 2 toes, these 2 toes, were completely removed and cut clear back in. Now, the old man used to joke that, you know, if he ever lost her on the beach, he could track her to the ends of the earth because of her weird footprint. They also removed all of her lymph nodes. They gave her radiation, or chemotherapy rather. All of her hair fell out. She got very sick. But something happened. Every Christian, prayer-believing person in the state of Oregon that had ever had any contact with our family, which is a lot of people, a lot of preachers, a lot of, you know, Christian people and leaders, and hundreds, thousands of people began praying for her immediately. And I believe she was healed. I don't know that she needed to have her toes removed because God took care of it, but she had part of her foot amputated. The cancer, they believe they got it all when they removed her lymph node glands, and she recovered from that, and her hair grew back, and that's been, you know, many years. I'm not even going to do the math. You do the math. I was a little kid. She's 85 now. So we're talking, you know, 35, 40 years ago. So, like 38 years ago. There, I did the math. So, all of this came from our attempt to start that church, and it was one of the biggest demonic attacks I've ever endured. That the demonic forces went after all of us in a way that I've been under attack. I've experienced it. You've seen the time I did Battle with the Witch stories. You've seen me go against the powers of darkness here on this channel in recent times, but never in my life has the demonic forces ever accessed so deeply into my family, and I've never seen a church destroyed almost overnight like that one was. And that is why I call that place the Church from Hell. All right. Thank you for your time. I hope you found this an interesting tale, an interesting story. And yeah, we'll continue with my autobiography, The Perils of an Interesting Life.